Sometimes the most valuable thing a person loses is not what everyone thinks they are searching for. Snow drifted softly through the streets of Boston, turning the city into a painting of white sidewalks, glowing street lamps, and blurred reflections on wet pavement. Most people hurried home without looking around. The cold had a way of convincing everyone that whatever waited indoors mattered more than anything outside. Emily Harper understood that feeling well. She pulled her thrift store coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of the used bookstore where she worked 6 days a week. The small shop sat between a bakery and a tailor shop, and by 8 o'clock every evening the entire block seemed to fall asleep. Emily locked the front door, checked it twice, and slipped the key into her purse. Her breath floated into the freezing air as she started the 20-minute walk home. The rent was overdue. Again. Her grandmother's prescription needed refilling by Friday. Again. And her savings account contained exactly $42.16. Also again. Life had become a collection of numbers she wished were bigger. Yet despite everything, she kept moving forward. Her grandmother always said that worrying was like carrying a backpack full of rocks uphill. The hill never became easier. You only became tired faster. Emily smiled at the memory as she crossed a quiet intersection. The city park ahead was almost empty. Snow covered the benches and walking paths in a smooth blanket of white. A few holiday lights still hung from the trees, casting warm gold reflections across the snow. Emily normally avoided the park at night, but it shortened her walk home by several blocks. Tonight, exhaustion won the argument. She stepped onto the pathway and listened to the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots. The world felt unusually still. Then something caught her eye. A shape resting on one of the benches near the fountain. At first she thought someone had forgotten a blanket. But as she moved closer, she realized it was a coat. Not just any coat. A beautiful camel-colored designer overcoat draped neatly across the bench as though someone had placed it there only moments earlier. Emily slowed. The coat looked expensive enough to belong in the display window of a luxury department store. She glanced around. No one. The nearest person was a man walking a dog nearly half a block away. Emily approached cautiously. "Hello," she called. No answer. The wind carried her voice into the night. She waited another moment before carefully picking up the coat. The fabric felt incredibly soft beneath her fingers. Even someone with no knowledge of fashion could tell it was valuable. Emily checked the bench again. Nothing else. No bag. No phone. No sign of an owner rushing back to claim it. "Great," she muttered. Now what? Common sense told her to leave it where it was. But another gust of icy wind swept through the park. Snowflakes landed across the coat. If she left it there overnight, it could be ruined. Emily sighed and folded it carefully over her arm. "One night," she said quietly. "Tomorrow I'll find whoever lost you." She resumed walking, but after only a few steps something inside one of the pockets shifted. Curious, she stopped beneath a street lamp. The light cast a warm circle across the snow as she gently reached into the coat pocket. Her eyes widened. A wallet. Not a cheap wallet. A handcrafted leather wallet. Emily stared at it for several seconds before opening it. Inside sat several credit cards and enough cash to pay 3 months of her rent. Her stomach tightened instantly. For one brief moment, a dangerous thought crossed her mind. No one would know. The thought disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Emily closed the wallet and slid it back into the pocket. Whoever lost this was probably worried sick. She continued toward home, holding the coat more carefully now. A block later, she felt another object inside a different pocket. Thinking it might be identification, she checked again. This time her fingers found a folded piece of paper and a small photograph. Emily unfolded the photograph first. It showed a smiling older woman standing beside a younger man. The picture was worn around the edges, as though it had been carried for years. Something about it felt important. Personal. Loved. Emily looked at the image for several moments before carefully unfolding the paper. A handwritten sentence appeared across the page in dark ink. 5 simple words. "If lost, some things are worth finding." Emily read the sentence twice. Then a third time. She did not know why, but the words lingered in her mind long after she folded the paper and returned it to the pocket. Standing beneath the falling snow, she looked down at the coat resting in her arms and suddenly felt certain of one thing. Tomorrow she was not just going to return a lost coat. She was going to find the person who had been carrying those words with them for a very long time. Emily lived on the 3rd floor of an aging brick building above a laundromat that never seemed to close. By the time she climbed the stairs that evening, her legs felt heavy from a long day of work and a freezing walk home. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old wood. She unlocked the apartment door quietly, trying not to wake her grandmother. The attempt lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Emily," a gentle voice called from the living room. "That you?" Emily smiled immediately. Who else would be carrying enough books to open a second bookstore? Her grandmother laughed softly. 76 years old and still determined to find something positive in every situation, Margaret Harper sat wrapped in a knitted blanket beside a small lamp. A crossword puzzle rested in her lap. "You are late," Margaret said. "Snow." Emily carefully hung her coat near the door. Then she glanced toward the expensive camel-colored overcoat draped across a dining chair. "And a small mystery." Margaret followed her gaze. "That belongs to a mystery?" "Possibly." Emily sat beside her and explained everything. The park, the bench, the wallet, the photograph, the handwritten note. Margaret listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, her grandmother studied the coat for several moments. "You know," she said finally, "most people would have taken the money." Emily shrugged. "It is not my money. Most people would still take it." Emily looked down at her hands. The truth was that temptation had followed her all the way home. $42.16 did not stretch very far. The pharmacy bill sitting on the kitchen counter certainly knew that. So did the landlord. So did the electric company. Yet every time she imagined keeping anything from that wallet, she remembered the old photograph. Whoever owned that coat clearly cared about it. "I just want to find the owner," she said quietly. Margaret smiled. "Your father would be proud of you." The words warmed her more than the apartment heater ever could. Later that night, after her grandmother went to bed, Emily carried the coat to the kitchen table. A mug of tea sat beside her while snow drifted beyond the window. She checked every pocket carefully, hoping to find some kind of identification. A business card, a receipt, anything. The wallet contained credit cards and cash, but no driver's license. Strange. The photograph remained tucked safely inside one pocket. The folded note remained in another. If lost, some things are worth finding. Emily read the sentence again. There was something oddly personal about it, as though it meant more than the coat itself. She carefully placed everything back exactly as she found it. Then she noticed a small stitched label inside the collar. The designer name was one she recognized only because wealthy customers occasionally mentioned it at the bookstore. The coat probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. Emily stared at it in disbelief. "Who leaves something like this on a park bench?" she whispered. The next morning she began her search. Before work, she stopped by the park and asked the groundskeeper whether anyone had reported a missing coat. No luck. During lunch, she called the city's lost and found office. Nothing. After work, she visited 2 nearby police stations. Again, nothing. By evening, frustration was beginning to replace optimism. Whoever owned the coat either had not reported it missing or was searching somewhere else entirely. 3 days passed. Then 4. Emily kept the coat folded neatly inside a garment bag to protect it. Every morning, she checked local community boards online. Every afternoon, she asked questions. Every evening, she returned home without answers. On the 5th day, while shelving books at work, she overheard 2 customers discussing a news article. "Did you see that story?" one woman asked. "Some businessman offering a reward for a lost item." Emily looked up instinctively. Her heart skipped. A reward? Could it be connected? She tried not to appear too interested as the conversation continued. Unfortunately, neither customer mentioned details. By closing time, curiosity had completely taken over. That evening, she searched local websites from her old laptop. Hundreds of listings appeared. Lost pets, lost phones, lost luggage. Then one headline caught her attention. It was short, simple, almost hidden among dozens of others. Seeking information regarding a missing personal item. Emily clicked immediately. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen. The description was frustratingly vague. No mention of a coat. No mention of a wallet. No mention of a photograph. Only one sentence stood out. "The item has significant sentimental value. If you have information, please contact the number below." Emily stared at the screen. Sentimental value. Her thoughts immediately returned to the worn photograph inside the pocket. Suddenly, the mystery felt much larger than an expensive coat. And for the first time, she wondered if somewhere in the city, The person who lost it might be searching just as desperately for it as she was searching for them. Across the city, Nathan Cole stared at the empty space inside a cedar-lined drawer in his penthouse study and felt a frustration he rarely allowed himself to show. The coat itself could have been replaced 100 times over. The wallet could be canceled and rebuilt within an hour. Even the cash meant nothing. But the photograph was different. Nathan leaned back in his chair and rubbed a hand across his jaw. The worn picture had traveled with him for nearly 10 years. It was the last photograph ever taken with his mother before her unexpected passing. Every major milestone of his life had happened with that photograph tucked somewhere nearby. Business launches, award ceremonies, difficult decisions. It had become less of an object and more of a reminder. A reminder of where he came from before success changed everything around him. On the desk sat a printed copy of the notice his assistant had distributed across local websites and community boards, seeking information regarding a missing personal item. The wording had been intentional. Nathan did not want publicity. He certainly did not want headlines. Yet 5 days had passed, and nothing useful had surfaced. Still nothing? He asked as his phone rang. A few calls, his assistant replied. Mostly people hoping for a reward. Nathan sighed. I expected that. Do you want us to expand the search? He glanced toward the city skyline beyond the glass windows. Snow still covered rooftops and sidewalks below. Yes, but quietly. After ending the call, Nathan found himself thinking about the park again. He had been walking there alone after a difficult week. No security team, no schedule, no meetings, just an ordinary evening. Somehow the coat had been forgotten on a bench. A careless mistake he almost never made. Yet what bothered him most was not the loss. It was uncertainty. He kept imagining the photograph buried beneath melting snow or thrown away by someone who saw no value in it. Meanwhile, several miles away, Emily sat behind the counter of the bookstore, studying the phone number listed beneath the online notice. She had reopened the page at least 6 times throughout the day. Logic told her to call immediately, yet something kept stopping her. What if it was not the same person? What if she sounded ridiculous? During a slow hour that afternoon, she finally made a decision. She grabbed a notepad and dialed the number. The call connected after 3 rings. Information services, a professional voice answered. Emily immediately felt nervous. Hi. I saw the notice about a missing personal item. Do you have information regarding it? Emily hesitated. Maybe. I found something several days ago. The representative became noticeably more attentive. Could you describe it? Emily glanced around the empty bookstore before lowering her voice. I would rather verify the owner first. Silence followed. Then the representative said, That is understandable. Relief washed through her. At least she did not sound foolish. Can you tell me something about the item? She asked. Papers shuffled on the other end. Finally, the representative replied carefully. The owner stated that the item contains a photograph of significant sentimental value. Emily's heart immediately quickened. The photograph. It had to be connected. And a handwritten note? She asked. Another pause. Yes. Emily smiled despite herself. Okay, I think I found your person. By evening, arrangements had been made for a meeting 2 days later. A neutral location. A public place. Simple and safe. Emily hung up feeling strangely relieved. The mystery that had occupied her thoughts for nearly a week finally seemed close to ending. Yet as she locked the bookstore that night, she found herself thinking about the handwritten sentence again. If lost, some things are worth finding. The words lingered in her mind as she walked home beneath strings of winter lights. She wondered who wrote them. She wondered why the photograph mattered so much. Most of all, she wondered about the person on the other side of the search. What kind of man carried a note like that inside a designer coat? Across the city, Nathan received a brief message from his assistant. Possible lead confirmed. Meeting scheduled. For the first time in days, he smiled. He had no idea that the person who found the coat was a young bookstore employee struggling to pay rent. He had no idea she had protected every item as though it belonged to a friend. He had no idea she had been tempted by circumstances and chosen honesty anyway. All he knew was that somewhere in Boston, a stranger had done the right thing when nobody was watching. And for reasons he could not yet explain, that thought interested him almost as much as recovering what he had lost. Saturday arrived with bright winter sunlight, reflecting off patches of snow that still covered the sidewalks. Emily spent nearly 20 minutes deciding what to wear before finally, choosing a simple navy sweater and dark jeans. The meeting was not a job interview. It was not a date. It was only the return of a lost coat. Yet her nerves insisted on treating it as something much larger. Before leaving, she carefully checked the garment bag one final time. The wallet remained untouched. The photograph remained safely tucked inside the pocket. The folded note remained exactly where she had found it. Satisfied, she zipped the bag closed and headed downtown. The meeting location was a small independent cafe near Boston Common. Public, comfortable, neutral. Exactly the kind of place two strangers might choose when neither wanted complications. Emily arrived 10 minutes early. She ordered a tea she could barely afford and chose a table near the window. Every time the front door opened, she glanced up. Every time it was someone else. At exactly 11 o'clock, the bell above the cafe door chimed again. Emily looked up automatically. A tall man stepped inside carrying the cold air with him. He appeared to be in his mid-30s. Dark brown hair, calm expression, simple charcoal coat. Nothing flashy, nothing that suggested extraordinary wealth. He paused near the entrance and scanned the room. When his gaze landed on the garment bag beside Emily's chair, something changed in his eyes. Relief. Genuine relief. He approached slowly. Emily Harper? Emily stood. Yes. The man smiled. Nathan Cole. They shook hands. His grip was warm despite the winter weather. For a moment, both seemed unsure what came next. Then Emily gestured toward the empty chair. Please sit. Nathan thanked her and settled across from her table. Up close, he looked tired. Not physically exhausted. More like someone who had spent several days carrying concern he could not quite put down. Emily slid the garment bag across the table. I think this belongs to you. Nathan carefully unzipped it. The moment he saw the coat, his shoulders relaxed. Then he reached into the pocket and found the wallet. Another pocket revealed the folded note. Finally, he removed the photograph. For several seconds, he simply looked at it. The noise of the cafe seemed to disappear around him. Emily noticed the small smile that appeared on his face. It was not the smile of someone recovering an expensive possession. It was the smile of someone finding something deeply personal. Thank you, he said quietly. You have no idea how much this means. Emily smiled. I had a feeling it was important. Nathan glanced at the photograph again. It is. He studied her for a moment. You could have taken the cash. Emily laughed softly. That would have made this conversation awkward. To her surprise, Nathan laughed too. The sound was warm and genuine. Fair point. A server stopped by their table. Nathan ordered coffee. Emily insisted she was fine with tea. After the server left, silence settled briefly between them. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Eventually Nathan asked, How did you find it? Emily explained everything. The park bench, the snow, the online notice, the days spent searching. Nathan listened carefully, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. You spent almost a week trying to find me? He asked. It seemed like the right thing to do. Nathan leaned back slightly. Most people he encountered every day were eager to impress, negotiate, or gain something. Emily seemed interested in none of those things. She spoke honestly. She smiled easily. And she had protected a stranger's belongings while struggling through circumstances that would have tempted many others. I would like to give you a reward, he said. Emily immediately shook her head. No. Nathan blinked. You answered that very quickly. Because the answer is no. You returned something valuable. It was yours. Nathan smiled. You are making this difficult. Good. That earned another laugh. The conversation gradually shifted away from the coat itself. Nathan learned she worked in a bookstore. Emily learned he worked in business, though he offered very few details. Nathan learned she lived with her grandmother. Emily learned he loved old books despite rarely having time to read them. One cup of tea became two. One coffee became another. Neither seemed eager to leave. At one point, Nathan glanced toward the folded note resting beside the recovered photograph. Did you read it? He asked. Emily nodded carefully. I hope that was okay. Nathan looked down at the handwritten sentence and smiled. My mother wrote that years ago. Emily felt something soften inside her chest. Suddenly the note made perfect sense. Nathan folded it carefully and returned it to the pocket. Then he looked back at her. I think she would have liked you. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks and laughed softly. Outside the cafe window, people hurried through the cold afternoon without noticing anything unusual. Yet neither Emily nor Nathan realized that what began as the return of a lost coat had quietly become the beginning of something neither of them expected to find. Over the next several weeks, neither Emily nor Nathan expected to see much of each other again. Life had a way of pulling people back toward their responsibilities. Yet somehow they kept finding reasons to stay in touch. It started with a message thanking her again for returning the coat. Then another asking for the title of a book she had mentioned during their conversation. A few days later, Nathan stopped by the bookstore claiming he needed a recommendation. Emily immediately suspected he could have found a recommendation anywhere else in Boston. She said nothing. Nathan purchased 3 novels he admitted he probably would not have chosen on his own. The following week, he returned to report that he had actually enjoyed one of them. Before long, his visits became a familiar part of her routine. Every Thursday afternoon, sometime between 3 and 4 o'clock, the bell above the bookstore door would ring and Nathan would appear carrying coffee for both of them. He never stayed long. 30 minutes, sometimes less. Yet Emily found herself looking forward to those visits more than she wanted to admit. One snowy afternoon, Nathan arrived to find her struggling with a stack of donated books near the back of the store. Without hesitation, he rolled up his sleeves and helped organize shelves for nearly an hour. "You know," Emily said while placing books into alphabetical order, "most customers do not volunteer for manual labor." Nathan smiled. "Maybe I am trying to earn better recommendations." "You are failing. That seems harsh. You bought a 600-page historical biography and admitted you only read the first chapter." Nathan laughed. Fair criticism. What Emily did not know was that Nathan had quietly rearranged his schedule more than once just to stop by the bookstore. Board meetings could be moved. Conference calls could wait. Yet an hour spent talking with Emily somehow felt more valuable than most items on his calendar. For the first time in years, he enjoyed conversations where nobody wanted anything from him. Nobody cared about profits, acquisitions, or market forecasts. Emily treated him exactly the same way she had on the day they met. Meanwhile, Emily remained completely unaware of who Nathan truly was. She knew he worked in business. She knew he traveled occasionally. She knew he seemed unusually comfortable in almost every situation. Beyond that, very little. Whenever the topic turned toward work, Nathan redirected the conversation with remarkable skill. One evening, after closing the bookstore, Emily invited Nathan to join her and her grandmother for dinner. Nathan accepted immediately. The apartment was small. The dining table barely seated 3 people comfortably. The meal consisted of homemade soup, fresh bread, and a pie Margaret insisted everyone try twice. Yet Nathan could not remember the last time he had enjoyed an evening more. Margaret quickly adopted him as if he had been part of the family for years. "You work too much," she informed him halfway through dinner. Nathan nearly choked on his soup. Emily laughed. "She says that to everyone." "Because everyone works too much," Margaret replied. "Life is shorter than people think." Nathan glanced toward the framed family photographs on the wall. One picture showed a young Emily standing beside her late father. Another showed Margaret holding Emily as a child. The room carried something money could never purchase: warmth, history, belonging. As the evening ended, Nathan helped wash dishes despite repeated protests. Later, while walking home beneath the glow of streetlights, he found himself smiling. Across town, his assistant was leaving increasingly concerned messages. Investors wanted meetings. Journalists wanted interviews. Executives needed approvals. Yet Nathan ignored every notification for a few more minutes. His thoughts remained in a tiny apartment above a laundromat. A week later, a customer entered the bookstore carrying a newspaper. The front page featured a photograph of one of the most influential business leaders in the country attending a major charity event. The paper remained folded, preventing Emily from seeing the image clearly. She never noticed it. Nathan, however, would have recognized himself immediately. Fate seemed determined to delay the truth a little longer. And while neither of them knew it, events already set in motion were moving quietly toward a moment that would change everything. Because somewhere beyond the walls of the bookstore, Nathan's carefully hidden world was beginning to collide with the simple life Emily believed he lived. Spring arrived gradually, replacing snow-covered sidewalks with blooming trees and crowded outdoor cafes. The bookstore remained busy, and Emily settled into a comfortable routine that included far more messages and conversations with Nathan than she ever expected. What she did not know was that Nathan's carefully balanced worlds were becoming increasingly difficult to keep separate. His company was preparing for its annual Literacy Foundation event, one of the largest charitable gatherings in New England. Attendance was expected from educators, nonprofit leaders, business executives, and community organizations. For years, Nathan had treated the event as another responsibility on a long list of obligations. This year felt different, because for the first time, there was someone he wanted to share it with. One Thursday afternoon, Nathan entered the bookstore carrying 2 coffees as usual. Emily smiled the moment she saw him. "You are late," she said. "By 4 minutes." Nathan placed a cup beside her. "I was informed traffic exists." "Excuses." He laughed and leaned against the counter. "I have a question." Emily immediately became suspicious. "That sounds dangerous." "There is a literacy fundraiser next Saturday." "Okay. Would you like to come?" Emily blinked. "You are inviting me to a fundraiser? You work in a bookstore. I assumed books might interest you." "That is a surprisingly logical argument." Nathan smiled. "I spent several minutes preparing it." Emily agreed before she could overthink it. The following week passed quickly. On Saturday morning, she chose a simple emerald green dress she rarely had an opportunity to wear. Margaret insisted she looked beautiful. Emily insisted Margaret was biased. Margaret insisted she was correct. By early evening, Emily arrived at the downtown convention center where the event was being held. The building itself was enormous. Glass walls reflected the golden light of sunset, while luxury vehicles lined the entrance. The moment Emily stepped inside, she felt slightly out of place. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant gowns filled the lobby. Waiters carried trays of sparkling drinks. Large displays showcased literacy programs funded throughout the region. Emily checked her phone. Nathan had sent a brief message. "Running a few minutes behind. See you inside." She smiled and slipped the phone into her purse. At least she would know one person. A volunteer greeted her and handed her an event program. Emily thanked him absent-mindedly while looking around the crowded ballroom. Then her eyes drifted toward the front cover of the program. She froze. A photograph filled most of the page. The man in the picture looked familiar. Painfully familiar. Dark hair. Calm smile. The same eyes she had spent months talking to. Her pulse immediately accelerated. Below the photograph appeared a name in large letters. Nathan Cole, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Cole Global Enterprises. Emily stared at the page, then looked again. The words refused to change. Founder, Chief Executive Officer. Cole Global Enterprises. One of the largest privately owned companies in the country. Her mouth went dry. No, that could not be right. A strange buzzing filled her ears. Around her, guests continued chatting and laughing while Emily stood completely still. Suddenly, dozens of small memories returned all at once. The expensive coat, the carefully avoided work discussions, the constant schedule flexibility, the confidence, the vague answers. Every missing piece began falling into place. Before she could process any of it, the ballroom lights dimmed. Conversations faded. Guests moved toward their seats. Emily found herself sitting in the third row almost without realizing it. A presenter stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. Then came the introduction. Please join me in welcoming entrepreneur, philanthropist, and founder of the Cole Literacy Foundation, Nathan Cole. The room erupted into applause. Hundreds of people rose to their feet. Emily felt her heart sink. Nathan walked onto the stage with effortless confidence. He looked exactly the same and completely different at the same time. The man who helped organize books in a tiny bookstore now stood before a crowd of influential leaders. The man who shared soup with her grandmother was being introduced as one of the most successful businessmen in America. Nathan smiled and thanked the audience. Then his eyes moved across the room. For a brief second, he saw her. His expression changed instantly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But Emily noticed. Surprise. Concern. Realization. He knew she had discovered the truth. The applause continued around them. Yet Emily barely heard any of it. Because in that moment, one question echoed louder than everything else. If Nathan had hidden something this important, how much of the man she thought she knew was actually real? The applause continued long after Nathan began speaking, but Emily barely heard any of it. She remained seated in the third row, staring at the stage while questions raced through her mind. Every conversation they had shared suddenly felt different. Every unanswered question now seemed to have an explanation. Founder, Chief Executive Officer, Philanthropist. The titles echoed in her thoughts while Nathan spoke about literacy programs and educational opportunities. The audience listened attentively. Emily tried. She really did. But concentration had become impossible. When the presentation ended, hundreds of guests immediately moved toward the stage. Business leaders wanted introductions. Journalists wanted comments. Sponsors wanted photographs. Emily stood quietly and headed toward the nearest exit. She needed air. She needed distance. Most of all, she needed time to think. Outside, evening had settled over the city. The cool spring breeze felt refreshing after the crowded ballroom. Emily walked quickly across the plaza without a destination in mind. She had almost reached the sidewalk when she heard footsteps behind her. Emily. Nathan's voice stopped her instantly. She closed her eyes briefly before turning around. Nathan stood a few feet away. Gone was the spotlight and the audience. Yet somehow he looked more nervous now than he had on stage in front of hundreds of people. For several seconds, neither spoke. "You were going to tell me?" Emily asked quietly. Nathan exhaled. "Yes." When? The question landed harder than she intended. Nathan did not answer immediately. "Soon." Emily laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "That is not really an answer." Nathan nodded. "I know." The plaza around them remained busy with guests entering and leaving the event. Yet the conversation felt strangely private. "How long?" Emily asked. "How long did you plan on letting me think you were just some guy who worked in business?" Nathan looked down briefly. "I never intended to deceive you." Emily crossed her arms. "You avoided every conversation about your career. Because things change when people know. Maybe because they deserve to know." Nathan accepted the criticism without argument. That somehow made it harder for Emily to stay angry. "You know what bothers me?" she continued. "It is not the money." Nathan looked at her carefully. "I know. It is that I told you everything. About my grandmother. About struggling to pay bills. About my life." Her voice softened. "And you already knew you were hiding something enormous." Nathan remained silent for several seconds. "You are right." The honesty surprised her. No excuses. No defense. Just acceptance. "Then why?" she asked. Nathan looked toward the city lights beyond the plaza. "Because for the first time in years, someone treated me like a normal person." His voice remained calm, but Emily heard the truth behind it. People usually see headlines first. Titles, wealth, expectations. They decide who I am before I speak. He looked back at her. "You never did that." Emily felt some of her anger shift into something more complicated. "That still does not make it okay." "I know." Again, no argument. No justification. Just honesty. The simplicity of it disarmed her. Nathan took a slow breath. "The day you returned that coat, you could have accepted a reward. You could have sold the wallet. You could have disappeared." He smiled faintly. "Instead, you spent a week trying to find a stranger." Emily looked away. Anyone should have done that. Most people would not. The words lingered between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Traffic moved through nearby streets. Laughter drifted from the event entrance. The city continued around them while the conversation remained suspended in place. Finally, Emily sighed. "I do not know what to think right now." Nathan nodded. "That is fair. Everything feels different." From my side, nothing changed. Emily looked at him. Nathan's expression remained steady. "The bookstore. Your grandmother. The conversations. Those things were real." His voice grew quieter. "The person you got to know was real." Something in his tone made it difficult to look away. Yet the hurt remained. Not because he was wealthy. Because trust, once shaken, needed time. "I need space," she said softly. Nathan's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Okay." The single word carried disappointment, but also respect. Emily appreciated that more than she could explain. Nathan did not follow her. Did not argue. Did not try to convince her otherwise. He simply stepped back and allowed her the choice. As she walked away, she felt his gaze remain on her until she disappeared into the evening crowd. Across the plaza, Nathan remained standing beneath the city lights. For years he had solved problems with strategy, resources, and determination. Yet for the first time, he faced something money could not fix. Because the one person whose opinion mattered most was no longer sure she could trust him. And as Emily disappeared into the night, both of them realized the hardest part of their story was only beginning. The days that followed felt longer than they should have. Emily threw herself into work, hoping routine would quiet the confusion in her mind. She organized inventory, helped customers, and spent evenings with Margaret, yet Nathan remained present in her thoughts. Every shelf in the bookstore seemed to hold a memory. Every cup of coffee reminded her of a conversation. The frustrating part was that her feelings had not disappeared simply because she had learned the truth. If anything, they had become more complicated. One rainy afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the fundraiser, Emily was sorting donated books when her manager rushed into the back office carrying a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" he asked excitedly. Emily glanced up. "Seen what?" He pointed to an article discussing a major new literacy initiative that would provide funding for struggling community bookstores and neighborhood reading centers across the city. Emily scanned the page. Then her eyes stopped on a familiar name. Nathan Cole. The article explained that the project would focus on preserving small independent bookstores that served local communities. Emily stared at the photograph accompanying the story. Nathan stood beside a group of children holding books, smiling in the same quiet way she remembered. "That is impressive," her manager said. Emily nodded without speaking. What she did not know was that Nathan had spent much of the past 2 weeks thinking about her. He respected her request for space. He had not called. He had not appeared at the bookstore. Yet he could not stop remembering the night she returned his coat or the countless moments afterward. More than once, he found himself driving past the bookstore simply to see whether the lights were still on. He never stopped. He never went inside. He simply kept driving. Then, 3 days later, something unexpected happened. Emily received a letter addressed to the bookstore. Inside was an invitation to attend the public launch of the literacy initiative. Her manager immediately insisted they go. "This could be important for us," he said. Emily considered declining. Then curiosity won. On Saturday morning, she arrived at the newly renovated public library where the event was being held. Families filled the building. Volunteers distributed books. Children participated in reading activities. The atmosphere felt warm and welcoming rather than corporate. Emily relaxed slightly. This was a world she understood. Near the entrance stood a large display highlighting future community projects. Emily wandered through the exhibit, reading descriptions and examining photographs. Then she stopped. One display featured a proposal for a new neighborhood reading center. The location caught her attention immediately. It was only a few blocks from her apartment. She read further. The center would provide free tutoring, book access, and educational programs for families. At the bottom of the display appeared a small quote from the project's founder. "Books change lives when they are available to everyone." Emily smiled despite herself. That sounded exactly like something Nathan would say. "I was hoping you might come." The voice behind her was familiar enough to stop her heart for a second. She turned slowly. Nathan stood a few feet away. He looked nervous again. The sight surprised her. Men who led multinational companies were probably not supposed to look nervous. Yet there it was. "Hi," he said. "Hi." For a moment, neither knew what to say. Then Nathan glanced toward the display. "What do you think?" Emily looked back at the plans. "I think it will help a lot of people." Nathan nodded. "That is the goal." Silence settled briefly. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, Nathan spoke again. "There is something I want to show you." Emily hesitated, then nodded. Nathan led her through the library toward a newly completed reading room. Sunlight streamed through large windows. Shelves lined the walls. Comfortable chairs filled the corners. Children sat reading quietly throughout the space. It was beautiful. Emily slowly turned in a circle, taking everything in. Then she noticed a plaque mounted near the entrance. Her breath caught. "Dedicated to the belief that kindness still exists." Inspired by one extraordinary act of honesty. Emily stared at the words. "Nathan." He looked at her. "The day you found my coat, you had every reason to choose yourself." His voice remained soft. "Instead, you chose a stranger." Emily felt emotion rise unexpectedly. Nathan continued. "People keep assuming I searched for a lost coat." He smiled faintly. "That was never true." Emily looked at him, and for the first time since the fundraiser, she saw no businessman, no billionaire, no public figure. Only the man who sat across from her in a cafe holding an old photograph. "Then what were you searching for?" she asked quietly. Nathan's answer came without hesitation. "The person who returned it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sunlight streamed through the library windows while children turned pages and whispered excitedly to one another nearby. Yet Emily heard only Nathan's final words. The person who returned it. Something inside her finally settled. The anger she had carried since the fundraiser began to loosen its grip. Not because Nathan was wealthy. Not because he had built successful companies. But because she could finally see the truth beneath everything else. The coat had never been the story. The search had never been about recovering an expensive possession. It had always been about finding the person whose honesty reminded him that kindness still existed. Emily looked around the reading room again. Every shelf, every chair, every book waiting to be opened by a child. None of it felt like a grand gesture designed to impress her. It felt meaningful because it reflected values they already shared. "I think I understand now," she said softly. Nathan smiled. "Good. Because I was running out of ways to explain it." Emily laughed, and for the first time in weeks, the sound came easily. Over the months that followed, life gradually found a new rhythm. Nathan no longer hid pieces of his world. Emily no longer felt uncertain about where she stood in it. He visited the bookstore openly. She attended foundation events without feeling intimidated. Margaret continued treating Nathan like a favorite grandson and regularly reminded him that success was not an excuse to skip dinner. The Literacy Center opened officially that summer. Families filled the building every day. Children discovered books they otherwise might never have encountered. Volunteers packed reading rooms. Teachers organized workshops. Whenever Emily visited, she always paused beside the dedication plaque. Inspired by one extraordinary act of honesty, the words never failed to make her smile. Autumn arrived in a blaze of gold and crimson leaves. One Saturday afternoon, Nathan invited Emily to meet him at the city park where the entire story had begun. The same park, the same winding pathways, the same bench near the fountain. Emily arrived just before sunset. The trees glowed beneath the fading light. Nathan stood waiting beside the bench, hands tucked into the pockets of a familiar camel-colored coat. Emily immediately laughed. "You wore it." Nathan glanced down. It seemed appropriate. They walked together through the park while the evening sky turned shades of orange and pink. Eventually, they returned to the bench where everything started. Nathan reached into the coat pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. Emily recognized it instantly. The handwritten note. "If lost, some things are worth finding." Nathan carefully handed it to her. "Turn it over." Emily did. Her breath caught. On the back appeared a second sentence written in fresh ink. "And sometimes the best things find each other." Tears immediately filled her eyes. She looked up. Nathan was already smiling. "My mother wrote the first part," he said quietly. "I added the second." Emily laughed through tears. "That is not fair." "Why?" "Because now I am emotional. That was part of the plan." She shook her head, still smiling. Then Nathan took a slow breath and reached into his pocket once more. This time he removed a small velvet box. Emily's eyes widened. Around them, the park remained peaceful. Leaves drifted through the cool air. The fountain reflected the last light of day. Nathan looked at her with the same sincerity she had seen the first afternoon in the cafe. "A year ago, I lost something important." His voice softened. "What I found instead changed my life." Emily felt tears slipping down her cheeks again. Nathan opened the box. "Emily Harper, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" For one brief second, the entire world seemed to pause. Then Emily smiled the brightest smile he had ever seen. "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger as laughter and tears mixed together. Above them, the evening sky deepened into twilight. The bench remained exactly where it had always been. A simple place where a lost coat once waited for someone honest enough to pick it up. And years later, visitors to the Literacy Center would still see the framed note displayed near the entrance. "If lost, some things are worth finding. And sometimes the best things find each other."